I've been carrying mail in Greenbrier County, West Virginia, for 9 years, which means I've driven approximately 2,300 routes through the same valleys and over the same ridges and past the same mailboxes in the same order. The particular repetition that rural mail delivery imposes on a person's life, the route becoming a groove that the days slide through, the truck following the roads, the way water follows a channel, the path established, and the deviation from it, so rare that any deviation registers as an event, a disruption in the pattern that 9 years of repetition has made as automatic as breathing. Greenbrier County is large by West Virginia standards, 1,000 square miles of mountain terrain in the southeastern part of the state, the Allegheny Mountains defining the eastern boundary, and the ridges and valleys that characterize the region filling the interior, with the particular geography that produces the settlement patterns that I serve. The communities concentrated in the valleys, where the flat ground allows construction, and the roads follow the rivers and the creeks through terrain that the ridges separate into compartments, each valley a world unto itself. The communities connected by the highways that cross the ridges and that constitute the only links between populations that the terrain has divided. I know the county. 9 years of daily driving has given me a knowledge of the roads and the communities that exceeds what the maps contain. The particular familiarity that develops when you drive every road and deliver to every address and learn the terrain not from a screen but from the windshield, the curves and the grades and the hollows committed to a physical memory that operates below conscious navigation. I know which roads flood in spring. I know which mailboxes the snowplows take out in winter. I know the addresses where the dogs require caution and the driveways where the truck barely fits, and the particular challenges that each section of the route presents in each season. March of 2023. A Thursday, the weather showing the particular transition that March produces in the Alleghenies. The winter releasing its hold in stages. The valleys greening while the ridges held the last patches of snow. The air carrying the particular March quality that is neither winter nor spring, but the negotiation between them. I was running my standard route, the manifest loaded on the scanner, the truck loaded with the day's mail, the driving proceeding with the automatic efficiency that 9 years of the same route produces. The address appeared on my scanner at approximately 10 in the morning. A delivery, a package requiring signature, addressed to a post office in a community called Brethren. The address included a road name and a town designation that I did not recognize, which after 9 years of delivering to every address in the county was itself remarkable. The scanner showed the address as valid, the routing system having accepted it and assigned it to my route, the logistics software treating it as a legitimate delivery point that fell within my delivery area. I checked with my supervisor, a call from the truck, the particular brief conversation that route questions produce, the driver asking about an address, and the supervisor checking the system. He confirmed the address was on my manifest. He said the routing system had assigned it. He said he didn't recognize the town name, but that the system sometimes picked up addresses from adjacent routes or from new developments that hadn't been fully integrated into the regular routing. I followed the GPS. The device showed a route that branched off State Route 92, a highway that I drove regularly and that I knew as well as any road in the county. The branch point was approximately 20 miles from my usual territory, further south than my route normally took me, in a section of the county where the terrain climbed toward the ridges and where the hollows ran deeper and narrower than the valleys that my regular deliveries served. The turn was there, a road branching off the highway to the right, descending from the highway into a hollow, the entrance marked by no sign that I could see, the road simply beginning at the highway's edge and dropping into the terrain with the particular directness of mountain roads that don't announce themselves, because the people who use them know where they are. The road was paved, 2 lanes, the surface maintained, the center line painted, the edges showing the particular condition of a road that the county was maintaining at a standard that indicated regular use, the pavement showing no significant deterioration, the surface adequate for the mail truck without concern. The hollow closed in around the road with the particular speed that mountain hollows produce, the terrain rising steeply on both sides within the first quarter mile, the ridges pressing close, the forest canopy closing overhead to filter the March light into the dim, green-gray illumination that hollows hold, even on clear days. The road followed a creek, the water running beside the pavement with the constant murmur that mountain creeks maintain, the creek and the road sharing the hollow's floor in the particular partnership that defines mountain transportation, the water having carved the route that the road follows. 4 miles. The hollow continued for 4 miles, the road climbing gradually, the terrain narrowing and then widening in the particular rhythm that hollows produce as they ascend toward the ridges, the valley floor expanding at the flatter sections and contracting at the steeper ones. Mailboxes appeared at intervals along the road, the standard rural delivery boxes, maintained, showing names that I did not recognize, the addresses belonging to a community that my 9 years of carrying mail had not introduced me to. The hollow opened. At the 4-mile mark, the terrain widened into a small valley, the ridges pulling back from the road on both sides, the floor of the valley broadening enough to hold what the hollow had been leading to. A town, not a crossroads, not a rural cluster of houses grouped around an intersection. A town, a planned community with the particular layout that intentional settlement produces, the streets arranged in a grid, the buildings positioned with the regularity that planning imposes on construction, the particular geometry of a place that was designed before it was built. 2 streets intersected at the center of the valley, the intersection forming a crossroads that the town's primary buildings surrounded, the post office and a general store and a church, positioned at the intersection with the particular prominence that small towns give to their civic and commercial and religious structures. Maybe 30 houses, arranged along the 2 streets in lots that were uniform in size and that showed the particular consistency of a planned community, the houses similar in style and in scale, frame construction, the architecture suggesting the 1940s or 1950s, the particular style of mountain housing that the post-war era produced, functional and modest and built with the materials and the techniques that were standard in that period. The houses were maintained, not new, not renovated, but maintained in the condition that regular care produces. The paint intact, the roof sound, the yards kept, the particular appearance of a community that is occupied and that is cared for by the people who live in it. The post office sat at the intersection, a small building, the standard design of rural post offices that the federal government built throughout Appalachia in the mid-20th century, cinder block construction with a flat roof and a glass front door, and the particular institutional appearance that government buildings carry regardless of their size or their location. The building was open. The lights were on. The door was accessible. A flag hung from a pole beside the entrance, the standard equipment of a post office that was operating. I parked the truck and took the package inside. The interior was a post office, the counter, the service window, the mail slots, the particular configuration that every post office in the country shares, the standardized design of the federal postal system applied to a building in a valley in Greenbrier County that I had never seen and that my supervisor had never heard of. Behind the counter, a man, 50s, wearing the particular expression of a postal worker who is conducting business. The professional attentiveness that the counter produces, the focus on the customer and the transaction. I handed him the package. He examined it. He signed the scanner with a stylus, the name appearing on the screen in the digital rendering that the system produced. He produced a postmark stamp and stamped the delivery confirmation, the circular mark showing the particular format that postal designations use, the town name and the state and the date, arranged in the concentric circles of a standard postmark. Brethren WV. The ink was fresh, the impression clear. I thanked him. He nodded. I walked out of the post office and I stood on the sidewalk and I looked at the town, the 2 streets and the 30 houses and the church and the general store and the particular reality of a community that was there, physical and maintained and occupied, the buildings casting shadows on the ground, the flag moving in the March wind, the town existing in the valley with the undeniable presence of something that is made of materials and that occupies space. I drove back through the hollow, 4 miles of road, the creek beside me, the forest on both sides, the particular reverse of the approach, the hollow unwinding as I descended toward the highway. I reached Route 92 and turned left and continued my route and delivered the remaining mail and returned to the post office in Lewisburg where my supervisor was processing the afternoon's incoming. I mentioned Brethren. I described the town, the location, the post office, the delivery. My supervisor looked at me with the expression that I would see on every face that I described the town to in the weeks that followed, the particular expression of a person who is hearing information that contradicts what they know and who is determining whether the speaker is confused or joking or telling the truth about something that shouldn't be true. He said there is no community called Brethren in Greenbrier County. He checked the county records. He checked the Postal Service database. He checked the mapping systems that the service uses for routing. No Brethren. No road branching off Route 92 at the location I described. No postal designation for a community by that name in West Virginia or in any adjacent state. The postmark on my delivery confirmation showed a designation that the Postal Service had never issued, the circular stamp reading Brethren WV in the standard format of a postmark that the system said didn't exist. I drove back the following Thursday. The same route, the same section of Route 92, the same location where the road had branched off the highway and descended into the hollow. The road was there. I turned onto it. The pavement extended for approximately half a mile and then ended, the maintained surface giving way to gravel and then to dirt and then to the particular state of a road that has ceased to be a road, the surface returning to the forest floor, the trees growing in what had been the travel lanes, the creek running beside what had been pavement and was now just ground. I drove the half mile of pavement and stopped where the pavement stopped, and I looked down the hollow and saw forest. 4 miles of hollow extending toward the ridge, the terrain showing only trees and creek, and the undisturbed floor of a valley that held no town. No buildings visible through the bare March canopy, no streets, no intersection, no post office, no church. No 30 houses on 2 streets in a valley that I had driven through 8 days earlier and that had contained a planned community with a post office that was operating, and a man behind the counter who signed for a package and applied a postmark that the Postal Service says doesn't exist. The delivery confirmation is in the system. The signature is there. The postmark is there. Brethren WV, stamped in ink that was fresh when the man applied it, and that exists in the system as documentation of a delivery to a location that the county says has never contained a community, and that the Postal Service says has never had a designation. I've researched county records, historical maps, census data, the particular archives that document the existence of communities in the Appalachian Mountains, where towns were built and towns were abandoned, and towns were lost to the particular forces of economy and population and terrain that the mountains impose on the people who settle them. No Brethren, no community by that name in Greenbrier County in any period that the records cover. No planned community of 30 houses in a valley at the end of a 4-mile hollow off Route 92 inches any decade that the historical documentation includes. The town was there. The buildings were real. The post office was staffed. The postmark was applied. And the following week the town was gone and the hollow was forest and the valley held nothing. I carry the delivery confirmation. I look at the postmark. Brethren WV, the circular stamp of a post office that served a town that existed in a valley for the duration of 1 mail delivery, and that the hollow reclaimed in the 8 days between my visit and my return. And the hollow holds what it holds, and the road ends at the half-mile mark, and the forest fills the valley where the town was. Most weeks, and I wonder about the package, the physical object that I carried into the post office, and that the man signed for, and that went behind the counter and into the mail system of a post office that doesn't exist in a town that isn't there, where the package is now. What happens to mail that is delivered to an address that the system says was never issued? The delivery confirmation says delivered. The system says the address doesn't exist, and the postmark sits on the form Brethren WV, the ink real, the stamp real, the town gone. And the hollow runs deep, and the valley sits at the end of it. And on one Thursday in March, a town was there that has never been there. And the mail was delivered, and the mail carrier drove home, and the town returned to wherever towns go when they're finished being there. My grandparents' house in Hardin, Kentucky, is the fixed point around which my childhood organized itself, the particular location that every other memory orbits, the summers spent in the mountains of eastern Kentucky providing the gravitational center that the rest of my life, the school years and the suburbs and the particular flatness of growing up in Lexington, revolved around. The house was a 2-story frame structure on a street that ran parallel to the river, the North Fork of the Kentucky River, which flowed through the valley where Hardin sat, and which provided the town with the particular character that river towns in the mountains possess. The water constant and visible and central to the life of the community, the river the reason the town existed, and the axis around which the town's geography was arranged. I went to Hardin every June, 2 weeks, sometimes 3, the summers stretching from 1992 when I was 6 to 2002 when I was 16, and when the particular selfishness of adolescence made spending 3 weeks with grandparents in a mountain town less appealing than whatever the Possenson, 16-year-old version of myself, considered a better use of summer. My grandmother died in 2008. My grandfather had died in 2001. The house passed to my mother, and my mother maintained it in the particular way that mountain children maintain their parents' houses. The minimum effort that prevents deterioration without the investment that would constitute improvement. The house kept standing and weatherproof and locked, the interior holding the furniture and the belongings that my grandparents had accumulated over 50 years of marriage, and that my mother couldn't bring herself to dispose of, and that sat in the rooms where they'd been placed, accumulating dust, and the particular silence of objects that have outlived the people who used them. I went back in 2022, the first time in 20 years, the drive from Lexington taking me through the terrain that I'd traveled every June as a child, the highway climbing from the bluegrass into the foothills and then into the mountains, the landscape changing with each mile the way it always changed, the gentle pastoral of central Kentucky giving way to the steep, forested, narrow-valleyed terrain of the coalfields. Hardin appeared the way Hardin had always appeared, a small town in a valley, the river running through, the streets arranged along the valley floor, the houses climbing the hillsides on both sides, the particular geography of a mountain river town that exists because the valley provided flat ground, and the river provided water, and the coal in the surrounding hills provided the economy that the town was built to serve. I went back because of the house. My mother's health was declining, and the decisions about the property that she'd been deferring for 14 years needed to be made. The practical questions of what to do with a house in a mountain town that nobody in the family lived in or near, and that the real estate market in eastern Kentucky, valued at a price that was less than the cost of the roof repairs it needed. I was there to assess, to walk through the rooms and evaluate the condition, and determine whether the house was salvageable or whether the mountain and the weather and the 14 years of minimal maintenance had made the determination for us. The house was standing, the exterior showing the particular weathering that frame houses in the mountains acquire when the maintenance falls below the threshold that the climate requires, the paint faded and peeling, the trim showing bare wood where the paint had failed, the porch floor soft in spots, the gutters sagging, but standing, the structure intact, the roof holding, the walls plumb, the house performing its primary function of keeping the weather out despite the weather's persistent effort to get in. I walked through the rooms. The furniture was there, dusty and undisturbed, the arrangement unchanged from my grandmother's lifetime, the particular configuration of a house that has been frozen in the state its last occupant maintained, and that time has been working on without any human interference. The kitchen, the living room, the bedrooms upstairs, the bathroom with the clawfoot tub, everything present and preserved in the particular amber of abandonment. The house, a museum of my grandparents' life that nobody had curated and that nobody had visited. I went to the diner for lunch. The diner on the main street, a business that had been operating since before my grandparents moved to Hardin, and that served the town with the particular constancy that mountain diners provide, the same food in the same room for the same community for decades. The woman behind the counter was maybe 60, old enough to have been working there when I was coming to Hardin as a child, the particular tenure that mountain business employees maintain when the business is the business and the alternatives are limited. I asked about the flood. Casually, the way you mention a shared memory to someone who you assume shares it, the particular lightness of a reference to an event that doesn't require explanation, because everyone who was there remembers it. I said something about the flood of '97, the way the water came through town, the damage, the particular devastation that the event had produced. She looked at me with the expression of someone who has been asked about something that doesn't correspond to anything in their experience. "What flood?" she said. Not the dismissive what flood of a person who remembers and who doesn't want to discuss it. The genuine what flood of a person who is hearing a reference to an event that they have no knowledge of. I described it. The flood of 1997, July. The river rising after 3 days of rain, the water cresting the banks and running through the streets and entering the houses on the lower streets, my grandparents' street. the water reaching the first floor of the houses and holding there for approximately 12 hours before receding. 11 people killed, the drownings and the crush injuries, and the particular forms of death that floodwater produces in a town where the residents are asleep when the water arrives and where the warning system is a siren that some people hear and some people don't. She shook her head. She'd been in Hardin since 1983. She remembered every significant event that the town had experienced in 40 years. No flood, no deaths, no river cresting. The river had flooded minor amounts in some years, the seasonal high water that mountain rivers produce in spring, but nothing that reached the streets, nothing that entered houses, nothing that killed anyone. I went to the hardware store. The man behind the counter was third generation in Hardin, his grandfather having opened the store in the 1950s. I asked the same question, same response. No flood, no deaths, no event in 1997 that corresponded to what I was describing. The County Historical Society. I drove to the county seat and I sat in the office of the Historical Society and I described the flood to a woman who maintained the county's records of significant events and who searched the archives with the thorough attention that my description prompted, the particular diligence of a records keeper who has been asked about a specific event and who wants to provide an accurate answer. No flood in Hardin in 1997. No flood in Hardin in any year between 1990 and 2005. The river records. The gauge data that the Army Corps of Engineers maintains for every significant waterway in the region showed no crest event on the North Fork at the Hardin gauge that exceeded the minor flood stage in the years I was asking about. The water had not risen to the level that would produce the flooding I described. The river had behaved, the data confirmed, within the normal parameters of a mountain river that rises in spring and falls in summer, and that had not, in the period in question, produced a flood event that reached the town of Hardin. I sat in my car outside the Historical Society, and I thought about what I remembered. The memory was not vague. The memory was not the general impression of an event reconstructed from family stories and secondhand accounts. The memory was specific, sensory, detailed. I was in the upstairs bedroom of my grandparents' house. The water was audible below me, the particular sound of moving water in an enclosed space, the current running through the first floor of the house with enough force to push the furniture, the sound of objects striking walls, as the current carried them through rooms that the water had converted from living spaces into channels. I was 11 years old. I was in the bed that my grandmother made for me every June. The water was below me, and the sound was the sound of a house being occupied by a river, and the sound was real. My grandmother's voice. Stay upstairs. The particular tone that grandmothers use when the situation is serious, and when the instruction is not a request but a command, the voice carrying the authority of fear and the authority of love, and the particular urgency that a woman produces when she is protecting a child from something that the child cannot protect himself from. Stay upstairs. Don't come down. The water is in the house, and you stay where you are until the water goes away. The furniture floating past the window. I watched it from the upstairs bedroom window, the view showing the street below, the street that was a river, the brown water flowing between the houses at a depth of maybe 3 feet, the current carrying debris and branches, and the particular flotsam that floodwater produces when it moves through a town, the accumulated objects of daily life liberated from their positions by the water and carried downstream. A chair floated past the window, a kitchen chair, the wooden chairs that mountain kitchens contained in the 1990s, the chair moving with the current at walking speed, the particular surreal image of domestic furniture traveling through a street on a current of brown water. I remember this. The memory exists in my brain with the particular clarity and the particular sensory detail that traumatic memories retain, the encoding enhanced by the adrenaline and the fear and the particular state of heightened consciousness that a child experiences when the world becomes dangerous, the memory preserved in high resolution by the neurochemistry of terror. And the memory is wrong, according to everyone in Hardin, according to the county records, according to the river gauge data. The flood didn't happen, the water didn't rise, the 11 people didn't die. The event that I remember with the clarity of something that happened to me in a specific place at a specific time did not occur in the specific place at the specific time that my memory places it, except the waterline. I went to the house after the Historical Society. I walked around the exterior and I looked at the walls, and I found it on the south side. the side facing the river, the wall that would have received the water first if the river had risen, and if the water had reached the house, and if the current had flowed through the first floor the way my memory says it did. A line, faint, visible, only because I was looking for it, and because the afternoon light hit the wall at an angle that showed the particular discoloration that water leaves on a painted surface, the stain that floodwater produces when it stands against a wall for hours, and that the minerals and the sediment in the water deposit on the surface in a line that marks the water's highest point. The line was approximately 4 feet above the ground, the height that 3 feet of water in the street would produce against the foundation and the wall of a house that sits maybe a foot above street level. I photographed it, I measured it, I pressed my hand against the wall at the line and felt the particular texture of paint that has been wet and that has dried and that has been wet and that has dried, and that over 25 years has developed a texture that is subtly different from the paint above the line, the surface below the line slightly rougher, slightly more degraded, the particular damage that prolonged water contact produces on a painted surface. The line is there, on a house in a town where the flood didn't happen, at the height that the water would have reached if the water had risen the way I remember it rising, on the wall facing the river that everyone says never crested. I've been back twice. The line is there each time. The town remembers no flood each time. The records show no flood each time. And my memory holds the sound of water in the house, and the furniture in the street, and my grandmother's voice telling me to stay upstairs. I don't know which is true, the memory or the records, the water line or the gauge data, the sound of the river in the house, or the assurance of every person in Hardin that the river has never been in the house. Both are real. The memory is real. I was there. I heard the water. I watched the furniture. I heard my grandmother's voice. The water line is real. The stain is on the wall. The measurement matches the memory. The physical evidence of water at 4 feet on a surface that the county says the water never touched. And Hardin goes about its business. The diner serves its food. The hardware store sells its hardware. The river runs through the valley at its normal level. And nobody remembers the flood that killed 11 people and that put 3 feet of water in the streets and that left a line on my grandparents' house that is still there 25 years later. Nobody remembers. The town has forgotten, or the town never knew. Or the flood happened in a version of Hardin that the current version doesn't contain, and that my memory retained, and that the water line recorded, and that the records and the residents have no access to. The line is on the wall. I photograph it every time I visit. The stain fading with each year, but still visible, still measurable, still marking the height of water that the town says never rose. And I remember the water, the sound, the furniture in the street, my grandmother's voice. Stay upstairs, don't come down. The water is in the house. The water is in the house, in my memory, in the stain on the wall, and in the town where nobody remembers, and in the records that show nothing, and in the particular silence of a community that has no knowledge of an event that left its mark on a wall, and in the memory of a child who was there, and who heard the water, and who came downstairs in the morning when the water was gone, and who walked through rooms that were wet and that smelled of the river, and that the town, 25 years later, says were never touched. The water line says otherwise, and the water line is still there. I moved to Wise County, Virginia in 2019, which makes me what the locals call a come here as opposed to a from here, the particular distinction that mountain communities maintain between the people who were born in the county and the people who arrived from elsewhere, the distinction carrying no hostility but considerable significance, the from heres possessing a knowledge of the county and its history and its particular characteristics that the come heres can acquire only through years of residence and through the particular process of being told things by the from heres, the information dispensed in portions calibrated to the come here's demonstrated capacity for believing what they're told. My wife Rachel is a from here, born in Wise County, raised in the Hollow where her parents still live, educated at the county schools before leaving for college, and then returning because the mountains called her back the way the mountains call back the people who are genuinely from them, the particular gravity that the Appalachian homeland exerts on its native children, and that brings them back from wherever the world takes them with a force that is as real as any physical attraction. Rachel knows Wise County the way I know the neighborhood where I grew up in Roanoke, which is to say completely, the knowledge comprising not just the geography, but the history and the people and the particular stories that the county holds and that the from heres maintain as a collective archive the shared memory of a community that has been in these mountains for 2 centuries, and that has accumulated the particular knowledge that 2 centuries of occupying the same terrain produces. I mention Rachel's knowledge because her knowledge is the frame that the experience fits inside, the context that converts what I heard on a Sunday morning from a curiosity into something else. October of 2022. A Sunday morning, the weather clear and cool, the October light doing what October light does in the Virginia mountains, the low angle producing the golden slant that illuminates the autumn color from within, and that makes the ridges glow with the particular intensity that draws tourists from across the country, and that the locals take for granted the way you take for granted anything that happens every year. I was driving on the state highway that runs through the county, the main route that connects the communities along the valley, the road that every resident of Wise County uses, because the alternatives are the secondary roads that climb the ridges, and that add time and distance to every trip. I was passing the mouth of a hollow, one of dozens along the highway, the particular geography of the Virginia coalfields producing hollows at regular intervals, the drainages cutting into the ridges from the main valley, and creating the narrow side valleys where the communities that the coal industry built climbed into the mountains, and where, as the coal declined, the communities receded, the houses emptying from the head of the hollow toward the mouth, the retreat of habitation leaving the upper hollows to the forest and the weather, and whatever the forest and the weather maintained. The singing reached me through the open driver's side window. I had the window down because the October morning was warm enough to permit it, and because the mountain air at that temperature and that humidity produces the particular freshness that October mornings hold, the air clean and sharp, and carrying sound with the clarity that cool, dry air provides. The singing entered the truck through the open window as I passed the hollow's mouth, and the sound was immediately recognizable as congregational hymn, singing, the particular quality of multiple voices singing together in the style that Appalachian churches have been practicing since the tradition was established by the settlers who brought their hymns from the British Isles and who adapted them to the mountain environment, and who produced the particular vocal tradition that mountain congregations maintain to this day. The voices were in harmony, not unison, not the monophonic singing that casual groups produce when they're singing together without arrangement. Harmony, the multi-part vocal arrangement that mountain church singing is built on, the tenors and the baritones and the sopranos and the altos, distributing the hymn across the vocal range, with the particular distribution that the sacred harp tradition and its descendants use, the shape note singing that the Appalachian churches have been performing for 2 centuries, and that produces a sound that is unlike any other congregational music, the voices raw and full, and carrying the particular power that unaccompanied human voices produce when they're singing together in a space that amplifies them. The hymn was familiar, not a hymn I could name, but a melody I recognized. The particular melodic structure of a mountain hymn, the minor key and the modal intervals, and the particular emotional quality that mountain hymns carry, the sound simultaneously mournful and triumphant, the particular aesthetic of music that was composed by people who understood suffering and who found in the singing a response to the suffering that was as real and as useful as any other response available. I mentioned it to Rachel that evening. I said I'd heard singing from the hollow as I drove past, a church service, the congregation in good voice, the hymns carrying down the valley with the particular quality that the hollow's acoustics produced. I described the location, the specific hollow, the point on the highway where the singing had been audible. Rachel set down the dish she was drying, the particular pause of a woman who has just heard something that requires her to choose between 2 responses, the honest response and the comfortable response, and who is deciding which one to give to a husband who has been in the county for 3 years and who may or may not be ready for the honest version. She said the church in that hollow had been abandoned since the 1980s. She said the congregation had disbanded in approximately 1987 when the membership declined below the number that could sustain a church, the families leaving the hollow as the coal work dried up, the congregation shrinking from dozens to a handful to none, the church closing when the last deacon died, and when nobody remained to open the doors on Sunday morning. She said the building had been deteriorating since, the roof failing first, the way roofs fail in the mountains, when nobody replaces the shingles and the water gets in, and the rafters rot, and the weight of the snow does what the weight of the snow does to weaken structure. She said the roof had collapsed in the early 2000s, and that the building was now a ruin, the walls standing but the interior open to the sky. I drove to the hollow the following Sunday. The purpose was straightforward: to see the church and to confirm what Rachel had told me, and to determine whether what I'd heard the previous week had come from a source that the ruin could accommodate, a group of people using the shell of the old church for informal worship, the kind of ad hoc congregation that sometimes forms in mountain communities, when the formal churches are too far away, and when the need for Sunday singing persists after the institution that organized it has dissolved. I entered the hollow around 10 in the morning, the approximate time that I'd been passing the mouth of the hollow the previous week when the singing had reached me. The road into the hollow was paved for the first mile, the surface deteriorating as the hollow climbed, the houses appearing at intervals, some occupied and some showing the particular vacancy of structures that have been empty for years, the hollowed-out quality of a community that is losing its population from the top down. The singing started at approximately the 2-mile mark. Audible through the truck's open windows, the voices reaching me from a position further up the hollow, the hymn carrying down the valley with the same clarity and the same multi-part harmony that I'd heard from the highway. The sound grew louder as I drove, the voices becoming more distinct, the individual parts of the harmony separating enough that I could hear the movement of the melody through the sections, the tenors carrying the main line, while the sopranos ornamented above and the basses provided the foundation below. The church appeared around a curve at approximately the 3-mile mark. A building on the right side of the road, set on a slight rise above the pavement, the building visible through the trees that had grown around it in the decades since the congregation had maintained the grounds. The structure was white clapboard, the siding showing the particular weathering of wood that has been painted white and that the paint has been failing on for 30+ years, the color going from white to gray to the exposed wood beneath, in a gradient that the weather had applied unevenly. The walls stood. The 4 walls of the church were intact, the clapboard siding maintaining its attachment to the framing, the structure holding its rectangular form, the building recognizable as a church by its proportions and by the remnant of a steeple that rose from the front wall, the steeple truncated, the upper section missing, the remaining portion showing the structural framework without the covering that had enclosed it. The roof was gone, not partially gone, not damaged, not sagging, gone. The rafters had collapsed inward, the structural members lying in a tangle inside the walls, the particular configuration of a roof system that failed and that fell into the building it was supposed to protect. The interior was visible through the empty window frames, the windows long since broken or removed, the frames showing the rectangular openings that provided a view into the church's interior, which showed the collapsed rafters and the debris and the sky above where the roof had been. The floor was gone. Through the window frames I could see that the interior floor, the wide plank surface that the congregation had walked on and sat on for however many decades the church had operated, had collapsed into the crawl space below, the joists failing under the weight of the debris that the fallen roof had deposited on them, the entire floor system dropping into the void beneath the church and leaving the interior as a pit of rubble open to the sky. The church was a ruin, a shell, 4 walls holding nothing, covering nothing, containing nothing, except debris and weather, and the particular desolation of a building that was built for a purpose, and that has lost the capacity to serve that purpose. The singing was coming from inside the walls. I stood in what had been the parking lot, a gravel area beside the road that the weeds had colonized, but that still showed the compressed surface of ground that had been driven on by many vehicles over many years. I stood there and I listened to the singing that was coming from inside a church that had no roof and no floor and no congregation, and no capacity to produce the sound that it was producing. The hymn was clear. The harmonies were precise. The voices were multiple. The particular fullness of a congregation that numbered in the dozens, the sound filling the interior of the roofless, floorless shell with a volume and a presence that said full church, the particular acoustic signature of a space that is occupied by singing people, the sound reflecting off the walls and projecting outward through the empty windows with the amplification that the building's shape provided, even without the roof that should have completed the acoustic enclosure. I walked to the nearest window. The frame was at approximately chest height, the wall rising from the ground to the sill, and the opening extending above that to where the header had been. I looked through the window into the interior. The collapsed rafters, the fallen floor, the debris, the weeds growing through the rubble, the sky visible through the absent roof. The interior was a pit. Nothing could stand on the floor because there was no floor. Nothing could sit in the pews because there were no pews. The building could not contain a congregation because the building could not contain anything. The singing continued. From inside the walls, from the space that the walls enclosed, from the particular volume of air that the four walls of the church defined, and that the absent roof left open to the sky, the voices sang their hymn with the particular beauty and the particular devotion that mountain congregational singing produces, the harmony full, the tempo steady, the melody rising and falling with the emotional contour that the hymn's composition dictated. The singing performed with the committed attention of people who were singing for a purpose, and whose purpose required their best voices and their full participation. I stood at the window for approximately 15 minutes. The singing continued for the entire duration, the hymn completing and another beginning, the transition between hymns, showing the brief pause that congregational singing produces between songs, the moment of silence that separates the end of one hymn from the beginning of the next, the pause lasting maybe 5 seconds before the new hymn started and the voices resumed their harmony. I could not see the singers. The interior was rubble and sky, and the particular absence of any living thing. The singing came from the space that the walls defined, from the air inside the church, from a position that was inside the building, and that was not occupied by anything that my eyes could resolve into a human form. I drove back down the hollow. The singing faded behind me as the distance increased, the voices diminishing, the way voices diminish when you move away from them, the sound decreasing with distance in the normal acoustic pattern of a source that remains in position while the listener departs. At the mouth of the hollow, the singing was faint but audible, the same quality of sound that had reached me on the highway the previous week, the hymns carrying down the valley from a church 3 miles up the hollow, with the particular projection that mountain acoustics provide. I've driven up that hollow on 3 more Sundays. Each time the singing is present, the hymns audible from approximately the 2-mile mark, the voices growing louder as I approach the church. Each time the church is a ruin, the walls standing, the roof gone, the floor gone, the interior holding nothing but debris and weather. Each time the singing comes from inside the walls, from the space that the building encloses and that the building can no longer shelter. Rachel says the congregation sang. For decades, every Sunday, the people of the hollow gathered in that church and sang the hymns that their tradition provided, and the singing filled the building, and the building held it, and the hollow carried it. She says the congregation is gone, but the singing isn't the particular phenomenon of a practice that was performed with enough devotion and for enough years that the practice outlasted the practitioners, the singing continuing in the space where it was performed, because the space learned it, and because the walls remember it, and because the hollow carries it, the way the hollow has always carried it, down the valley and out to the highway where the come-heres drive past and hear the music and wonder. The church holds services every Sunday. The congregation is not there. The roof is not there. The floor is not there. But the singing is there. The hymns rising from inside the walls of a ruin in a hollow in Wise County. The voices of a congregation that disbanded in 1987, performing the music they performed every Sunday for decades. The harmony intact, the devotion intact, the singing continuing in a building that can no longer hold rain, and that somehow still holds the sound of the people who sang in it when the roof was whole, and the floor was solid, and the pews were full, and the hollow carried their voices down the valley on Sunday mornings, the way it carries them. Still, the walls remember, the hollow carries, and the singing continues. Every Sunday, in a ruin, in a hollow, in the particular persistence of voices that loved the singing enough that the singing didn't stop when the singers did. I drive the back roads of Clay County, West Virginia, because my work requires it, and because the particular geography of Clay County ensures that any work requiring travel within the county involves back roads, the terrain offering no alternative, the hollows and the ridges, channeling all movement through the valleys, where the creeks run, and where the roads follow the creeks, and where the communities that the county supports sit at the junctions and the crossroads that the terrain creates. I'm a home health nurse, which in rural West Virginia means I drive to the patients rather than the patients coming to me. The particular logistics of healthcare delivery in a region where the population is old and scattered and where the nearest clinic is an hour from the hollows where the people who need the clinic live. I've been driving Clay County for 7 years, which is long enough to have memorized every road and every crossroads and every structure that the routes I travel pass. The particular catalog of buildings and landmarks that repetition builds when you drive the same roads week after week, and when the landscape changes slowly enough that the changes register as events rather than as process. A tree down here, a house abandoned there, the gradual subtraction that the county experiences as the population declines, and the structures that serve the population follow the population into absence. The crossroads was on a route I drove every Wednesday, a state road that followed a creek through a hollow, and that intersected with a county road at a point where a small flat area at the junction provided enough room for the few structures that crossroads and mountain hollows attract, the particular nodes of commerce and community that develop where two roads meet and where the traffic from both creates the density of passage that justifies a store or a church or the small collection of services that rural crossroads provide. The store sat at the northwest corner of the intersection, a frame building with a covered porch and a facade that faced the state road, the particular architecture of a country store that was built to serve the hollow, and that showed its age in the way that unused buildings in the mountains show their age. The paint gone to bare wood, the porch floor sagging, the roofline dipping in the middle where the ridge beam had begun, the slow surrender to gravity that unmaintained structures perform over decades. A sign hung above the porch, the board showing the ghost of painted letters that the weather had eroded past legibility, the name of the store visible only as faint traces of pigment against the gray of the weathered wood. I'd been driving past this building every Wednesday for 7 years. I'd registered it the way you register any roadside structure on a regular route, the building cataloged in my mental inventory as closed, abandoned, the particular classification that you apply to structures that show no signs of occupancy and that you stop seeing as potential destinations and start seeing as features of the landscape, as fixed as the trees and the creek and the road itself. September of 2023. A Wednesday afternoon, the September light warm and golden, the hollow holding the particular quality of early fall that the mountains produce when the summer's intensity has moderated, but the autumn's decline hasn't begun, the forest green and full, the air comfortable, the driving pleasant in the way that mountain driving is pleasant when the weather cooperates and the roads are dry, and the terrain provides the particular beauty that these hollows offer to the people who drive through them regularly, enough to notice. I came around the curve before the crossroads and the store was open. The door was propped open with a wooden wedge, the interior visible through the opening, the lights on inside, the particular glow of incandescent bulbs producing the warm, yellow illumination that incandescent lighting provides, and that the fluorescent and LED lighting of modern retail does not. The porch was intact, the board showing not the sag and the deterioration that I'd been driving past for 7 years, but the particular condition of a porch that is used daily and that is maintained for use, the boards firm, the posts straight, the surface swept clean. I stopped. Not because the store being open was alarming, but because the store being open was surprising. The particular recalibration that the brain performs when a feature of the landscape that has been categorized as static changes its state, the closed building becoming an open building, in the same way that a parked car becoming a moving car draws attention. The change itself, the stimulus rather than the nature of the change. I parked at the crossroads and walked to the store. The porch steps were solid under my feet, the wood firm, the particular stability of lumber that is sound and that is bearing weight as it was designed to bear it. The porch felt used, the surface showing the wear that foot traffic produces over years, the boards polished in the path from the steps to the door, the particular patina of a commercial entrance that has been crossed by thousands of feet over the life of the business. The interior was a country store, the particular configuration that mountain general stores have maintained for a century, the shelves lining the walls, the counter at the back, the glass display cases and the wooden bins and the organization of goods that country stores use, the layout designed for the particular commerce of a rural community where the store carries everything the community needs because the store is the only store and the community's needs are the inventory. The shelves were stocked. Canned goods, dry goods, the particular inventory of a store that serves a community that cooks from basic ingredients and that needs the basic ingredients to be available at the crossroads rather than at a supermarket 30 miles away. The products were familiar in the way that product categories are familiar, the cans and the packages and the labels showing the brands that grocery products carry. But the specific labels were different from what I expected. The designs showing the particular artwork and the particular typography of packaging that I recognized from my childhood rather than from the present. The labels looking like the labels that my grandmother's pantry had contained in the 1990s. The same brands in different presentations. The graphic design of a previous decade applied to products that the current decade had redesigned. I noticed and I didn't process. The particular quality of not quite right that the labels produced was registered by the part of my brain that detects anomalies and was filed without analysis because the context, a store, products on shelves, didn't trigger the alarm that the anomaly alone might have produced. The setting normalizing the details that the details alone would have flagged. I selected a soda from the cooler, a glass bottle, which I noticed because glass bottles had been replaced by plastic in most retail settings, and because the brand on the label, while familiar, showed a logo design that I hadn't seen since childhood, the particular script, and the particular color scheme of a label that belonged to the late 1980s or early 1990s. I selected a bag of chips from a rack beside the counter, the bag showing a design that I similarly recognized from a different era, the packaging dated in a way that was specific enough to identify the approximate period, but that I processed as nostalgia rather than impossibility. The man behind the counter was maybe 70. He stood at a mechanical cash register, the kind with the physical keys and the mechanical display that shows the amount in a window at the top, the drawer opening with the particular bell that mechanical registers produce when the drawer releases, the sound that modern electronic registers replaced with the beep and the whir of thermal printer receipts. He rang up the soda and the chips. The total was low, lower than the current retail prices that I paid at every other store, the numbers on the register corresponding to prices that were consistent with the era that the packaging suggested, rather than the era that the calendar confirmed. I paid with cash. He made change from the drawer with the practiced efficiency of a man who has been making change at a register for decades, the fingers finding the denominations by touch, the bills and the coins placed on the counter with the particular precision of someone who has performed this transaction 10,000 times. He said nothing. Not hello, not the total, not have a nice day. He made change, and he looked at me with an expression that was neither friendly nor unfriendly, but that held the particular neutral attention of a person who is conducting business with a customer they don't know and who processes the transaction with the professional minimum of interaction. I took my purchase to the truck. I sat in the driver's seat and I opened the chips and I opened the soda and I ate and I drank and I looked at the store through the windshield, the building showing its open door and its lit interior and its porch and its sign, and the particular appearance of a functioning business at a crossroads in a hollow in Clay County. The chips tasted like chips. The soda tasted like soda. The particular flavors of products that I'd consumed hundreds of times over my life. The familiar taste of brands that I knew. The consumption unremarkable in every sensory dimension except the label on the bottle and the package design on the bag. The dated graphics that my present-day palate didn't reconcile with my present-day calendar. I mentioned the store to my friend Dale that evening. Dale lived in Clay County, had lived there his entire life, knew the county with the encyclopedic knowledge of a lifelong resident who had driven every road and who knew every business and every family and every structure that the county's geography contained. I described the store, the location, the crossroads, the building, the products, the man behind the counter. Dale looked at me the way Ray in Breathitt County had looked at the insurance salesman who described the gas station that didn't exist, the particular expression of a man who has just heard something that doesn't match what he knows, and who is trying to determine whether the speaker is confused or whether the speaker is describing something that the speaker actually experienced. He said that store closed in 1994. He said the owner, a man named Harold Combs, had operated the store at that crossroads for 41 years, serving the hollow and the communities around it, with the particular devotion that mountain storekeepers bring to their communities. The store opened 6 days a week, the inventory maintained, the credit extended, the business functioning as the commercial and the social center of the hollow for 4 decades. Harold died in 1994, a heart attack behind the counter on a Tuesday afternoon, found by a customer who came in for coffee and who found Harold on the floor beside the register that he'd been operating for 41 years. The store closed when Harold died. Nobody in the family was willing to operate it. The building was locked and the inventory was cleared, and the store was added to the county's inventory of closed commercial structures, and the crossroads was converted from a functioning intersection with a store to a junction where two roads met and where the building at the corner gradually deteriorated from a store into a ruin. I drove to the crossroads the next morning. The building was closed, not the functioning store that I'd entered the previous afternoon. A ruin. The porch collapsed on the right end. The door boarded shut with the plywood that someone had nailed across the entrance years ago, the interior visible through a broken window, showing empty shelves and a floor covered with debris, and the particular desolation of a commercial space that has been abandoned for decades, the light fixtures hanging from the ceiling, the counter visible at the back, the register gone, the space holding nothing but the debris and the dust that 30 years of vacancy produce. The soda bottle was in my truck. I picked it up and looked at the label. The brand was correct, the familiar name of a soda that I'd been drinking since childhood. The logo on the label was the logo that the brand had used in the late 1980s and early 1990s, the particular design that had been retired when the brand updated its packaging sometime in the mid-1990s. The bottle was glass, the weight and the texture of glass that the brand had used before switching to plastic bottles in approximately 1993. I was holding a bottle of soda that had been manufactured in approximately 1991 and that I had purchased the previous afternoon from a store that had been closed since 1994, and that I had consumed and that had tasted normal, and that had quenched my thirst with the particular satisfaction of a cold soda on a September afternoon, and that the label dated to a year that was 32 years before the afternoon when I bought it. I keep the bottle on my dresser, the label fading slightly with each month, the particular deterioration that paper labels undergo when they're exposed to air and light, the design becoming less distinct as the ink oxidizes and the paper dries, the bottle looking more and more like what it is, which is a piece of packaging from 1991 that is aging in 2024, with the particular acceleration of something that has skipped 32 years of the aging process, and that is catching up. The chips are gone, consumed, digested, converted into energy by a body that processed them as normal food, and that extracted the normal calories and the normal nutrition that a bag of chips provides, regardless of when the chips were manufactured, and regardless of the store that sold them, and regardless of whether the store was open, closed, or functioning or ruined. I bought food from a dead man's store, in a building that was open on a September afternoon when the building should have been boarded and collapsed and empty for 30 years. From a man behind a counter who made change from a mechanical register and who said nothing and who operated a business that the county says has been closed since 1994. The store is closed now. Every Wednesday, I drive past the crossroads, and the building shows its collapsed porch and its boarded door and its 30 years of vacancy. The store is closed and has been closed, and the ruin deepens with each year. But on one September afternoon, the door was open, and the lights were on, and the shelves were stocked, and the register rang, and Harold Combs, or whoever stood behind the counter, sold me a soda and a bag of chips at prices that belonged to $1,991, and that I paid with cash that belonged to $2,023, and that the drawer accepted, and that the change was made from. And the bottle is on my dresser, and the label is fading, and the store is closed. Most days, I've lived across the road from the Shelton Cemetery for 11 years, which means I've been looking at it from my kitchen window for approximately 4,000 mornings. The particular view that my house provides of the hillside where the cemetery sits, showing the headstones and the grass and the iron fence that somebody installed decades ago, and that the rust has been slowly converting from barrier to decoration. The cemetery is a family burial ground, the kind that mountain communities in western North Carolina have been maintaining since the settlement era, the particular tradition of burying your dead on your land rather than in a churchyard or a municipal cemetery, the family plot serving as both resting place and monument, the headstones documenting the generations that lived and died on this piece of mountain and that were returned to the mountain when they were done. The Shelton Cemetery dates from approximately 1810, the oldest readable stone showing a death date of April 1812. The engraving worn but legible, the particular style of early 19th century monument work, showing the hand-cut letters and the decorative elements that the stonecutters of that era produced. The cemetery spans nearly 2 centuries of burials, the stones showing the progression of monument styles from the crude fieldstone markers of the earliest graves through the more formal granite headstones of the mid-20th century to the polished, machine-engraved stones of the most recent burials, the last of which was placed in 2003 when the final member of the Shelton family who wished to be buried on the hillside was interred in the remaining plot, and the cemetery was, by the family's determination, full. 20 years of the same stones in the same positions. I know them the way you know anything that occupies your daily field of vision for a decade. The particular arrangement of granite and marble and fieldstone committed to a mental map that operates below conscious attention, the brain having cataloged the position and the size and the approximate shape of every stone in the cemetery so thoroughly that a change would register the way a moved piece of furniture registers in a room you know well, not through active observation but through the passive monitoring that familiarity provides. The view from my kitchen window shows the cemetery from the west, the hillside sloping up from the road with the stones arranged in the particular pattern that family cemeteries develop over 2 centuries, the oldest graves at the top of the hill where the original burials were placed, and the subsequent generations filling in downhill, the stones becoming newer as the hill descends, the chronology of death mapped onto the topography of the hillside in a gradient from 1,812 at the top to 2003 at the bottom. November of 2022. A Tuesday morning, the coffee made, the mug in my hand, the kitchen window showing the hillside and the cemetery in the gray November light that the mountains produce when the sky is overcast, and the leaves are down, and the forest and the grass and the stones are all the same shade of brown and gray, the muted palette of late autumn in the southern Appalachians. The stone was in the lower section of the cemetery, in the area where the most recent burials had been placed, the section that I could see most clearly from the window because it was the closest to the road, and because the angle of view from the kitchen showed the stones in this section with enough detail that I could read the larger lettering on the newer monuments. The stone was there, a headstone that had not been there the previous morning, positioned among the existing stones with the particular alignment that a properly installed monument shows, the stone upright and level, and set into the ground with the stability of a stone that has been placed by someone who knows how to place headstones. I set down my coffee. The particular response of a person who has seen something that requires more attention than the peripheral observation that morning coffee and window provides, the mug placed on the counter, with the automatic motion of a body that is redirecting its resources from the routine of morning to the particular focus that the unexpected demands. The stone was new, not new in the way that the 2003 stones were new, which was 20 years ago and showing the particular weathering that 2 decades of mountain climate produce on polished granite, the surface dulled, the engraving softened, the stone acquiring the particular patina that time and rain and freeze-thaw cycles impose on exposed rock. This stone was new. The granite was fresh, the surface showing the polish that monument companies apply to finished stones, the particular sheen of recently cut and polished rock that has not yet been exposed to the elements long enough for the exposure to show. The engraving was sharp, the letters cut with the precision of modern CNC equipment, the edges of each letter clean and defined, the particular crispness of lettering that has not been softened by weather. I put on my shoes and walked across the road and up the hill to the stone. The November morning was cold, the grass wet with frost, the cemetery holding the particular stillness that cemeteries hold in the early morning, when the light is flat and the wind is absent, and the stones stand in their positions with the patient permanence that stone provides. The name on the stone was not a name I recognized. I've lived across from this cemetery for 11 years, and I've read every stone in it multiple times. The particular hobby of a person who lives beside a cemetery and who finds in the names and the dates the particular satisfaction that genealogy provides, the documentation of lives lived and ended in this specific place. The family names on the existing stones, the Sheltons and the Ramseys and the Wilsons and the Prices, were the names I knew, the families that had buried their dead on this hillside for 2 centuries. The name on the new stone was none of those, a name I'd never seen on any stone in this cemetery or in any record of the families associated with it. The dates: born 1958, died November 2022. The death date was the current month, November of 2022. Someone had died in November of 2022, and a headstone had been placed in a cemetery that had been full since 2003, bearing the name of a person I couldn't identify, with a death date that was weeks old at most. The ground around the stone was undisturbed. This is the detail that converted the strange into the impossible. A headstone requires installation. The stone must be set into the ground, the base buried or mortared into a foundation, the process requiring excavation and placement, and the particular work that monument installation demands. The ground around this stone showed no evidence of any of that work. The grass grew to the base of the stone without interruption, the blades meeting the granite at ground level, with the particular seamlessness of grass that has been growing around an object for a long time, rather than grass that has recently been disturbed by digging and replaced. The soil was intact. No fresh dirt, no replaced sod, no evidence of excavation. The stone was set into the ground as if it had grown there, as if the granite had risen from the hillside the way the grass grew from the hillside, the stone emerging from the earth without the human intervention that the placement of a headstone requires. No funeral had been held. I would have seen it. I live across the road. The cemetery is visible from my kitchen and my porch and my driveway. Any activity on the hillside, the vehicles and the people and the equipment that a funeral and a burial and a monument installation produce would have been visible from my house during the daylight hours and audible during any hour. No vehicles had visited the cemetery. No people had gathered on the hillside. No equipment had been present. I checked the county records. I searched the name that the stone bore. The name did not appear in any county database. The property records and the tax records and the vital statistics that the county maintains for its residents showing no person by that name in Madison County or in any adjacent county. The person whose headstone stood on the hillside across from my house did not exist in any system that the county used to document the existence of its residents. I checked with the Shelton family, the descendants who owned the cemetery property and who maintained it and who had determined in 2003 that the cemetery was full. They had not placed a stone. They had not authorized a burial. They had not been informed that a new monument had appeared in their family cemetery bearing the name of someone who was not part of their family. The stone remained. I watched it from my kitchen window every morning and the stone was there, the fresh granite showing its polish and its sharp engraving, the name and the dates legible from the window, the stone maintaining its position among the existing monuments with the particular permanence that headstones are designed to display. January of 2023, a second stone, adjacent to the first, positioned with the same alignment and the same stability. The granite fresh, the engraving sharp, the name different from the first but equally unknown, the dates showing a death date of January 2023, the same undisturbed ground, the same absence of evidence that any installation had occurred, the same non-existence of the named person in any county record. March, a third stone, same section of the cemetery, same fresh granite, same sharp engraving, same unknown name, same current death date, same undisturbed ground. I started watching at night. The particular desperation of a man who needs to see the mechanism, who needs to observe the process by which headstones appear overnight in a cemetery that receives no visitors and that shows no evidence of installation. I sat at my kitchen window in the dark and watched the hillside through the hours when the stones had been appearing. The cemetery visible in the moonlight as a field of shapes on the hillside, the existing stones showing as dark rectangles against the lighter grass. I saw nothing. On the nights I watched, no stones appeared. The hillside held its existing stones, and the morning showed no new additions. The stones appeared on the nights I didn't watch. The particular behavior of a phenomenon that operates in the absence of observation, and that the act of observing prevents, the stones arriving during the windows when my attention was elsewhere, when sleep or obligation, or the simple inability to watch every night, created the gaps that the stones used to appear. I installed a camera, a trail camera, motion-triggered, aimed at the section of the cemetery where the new stones had been appearing, the camera positioned to capture whatever delivered or installed or produced the monuments that the mornings revealed. I ran the camera for 2 months. The camera captured nothing. On the night that the fourth stone appeared, in May of 2023, the camera's memory card showed continuous images of the hillside from dusk to dawn, the frames clicking at 1-minute intervals, the cemetery visible in the infrared, the existing stones showing as shapes in the gray-green spectrum. In one frame, the section of hillside showed the 3 existing new stones and the undisturbed ground beside them. In the next frame, 1 minute later, the 4th stone was there. Present in the infrared, the granite showing as a lighter shape in the image, the stone visible and real and positioned in the ground with the same settled permanence that the other 3 displayed. Between one frame and the next, 60 seconds. A headstone appeared in a cemetery without any visible mechanism, without any figure in the frame, without any disturbance of the ground, the stone simply present in one image when it had been absent in the previous image, the installation occurring in the gap between frames, in the 60-second window that the camera's interval created. 7 stones now. As of my last count, 7 new headstones in the Shelton Cemetery, each one bearing the name of a person who doesn't exist in any record, each one showing a death date that corresponds to the month of its appearance, each one installed without evidence of installation on ground that shows no disturbance. The cemetery was full in 2003. 20 years of no new burials, no new stones, no new occupants. And now 7, appearing at intervals of 2 to 3 months, the names unknown, the deaths unrecorded, the burials unperformed. The stones arriving in the night in the gaps between camera frames and between the hours of watching, and in the particular windows that the observation creates by the limitation of attention. The cemetery is growing, not through the process that cemeteries grow through, the deaths and the funerals and the burials and the monuments that the living install to mark the dead, growing through a process that I cannot observe and that the camera cannot capture and that the ground does not record. The stones appearing with the silent inevitability of grass growing or seasons changing. The cemetery expanding its population through a mechanism that operates in the absence of observation and that produces headstones for people who do not exist in any system that documents existence. I count the stones. Every morning, coffee in hand, kitchen window showing the hillside. I count the stones and I compare the count to the previous morning's count and I wait for the number to change. It will change. The 8th stone will appear on a morning when I'm not watching, in a frame that the camera missed, on ground that will show no digging, a fresh granite monument with a name I don't know, and a death date that is current, and the particular sharp engraving of a stone that was placed by something that places headstones in the night for people that the records don't contain. The cemetery was full, and now it isn't, and the stones keep coming, and the names are names I've never seen, and the hillside holds them the way it holds all its stones, with the patient permanence of ground that has been accepting the dead since 1812, and that has apparently not stopped accepting them just because the living decided in 2003 that the accepting was done. The ground decides, not the family, not the county, not the records. The ground decides who lies in it, and the stones appear for whoever the ground has received. And I count them every morning, and the number grows. I moved to Elkhorn Hollow in McDowell County, West Virginia, in the spring of 2021, which puts me at 3 years of living in a place that most people in the state consider a cautionary tale rather than a community. McDowell County is the poster child for coalfield decline, the county that every news story about Appalachian poverty uses as its example, the population that was 100,000 in 1950 and that is under 18,000 now, the hollows that were full of families and commerce, and the particular vitality that an active economy produces, emptying decade by decade as the coal diminished and the jobs left, and the young people followed the jobs, and the old people aged, and the houses went dark, and the infrastructure that served the population became the infrastructure of absence, the roads maintained for fewer people, the services reduced, the particular contraction that a community undergoes when the reason it exists is removed, and the existence continues without the reason. I came for the house, a 2-story frame structure on 3 acres at the mouth of Elkhorn Hollow, a property that the declining real estate market in McDowell County had priced at a level that my budget could accommodate, and that the photographs online showed as a solid house on a good piece of land in a location that the price suggested was either remarkable or problematic. The price was remarkable, the house was solid, the land was good. The location was a hollow in McDowell County, which meant the neighbors were few and the services were minimal, and the particular isolation that the county's geography and demography produced was the defining characteristic of the living experience. Elkhorn Hollow runs approximately 4 miles from the state highway at its mouth to the turnaround at its head, a road following a creek through a valley that narrows as it climbs, the terrain steep on both sides, the houses arranged along the road at the intervals that the flat ground provided, the particular geography of an Appalachian hollow, where the road and the creek share the valley floor, and the houses sit on whatever level spots the terrain offers between the road and the slopes. At its peak, the hollow held maybe 50 houses, serving a population of approximately 500 people, the families that the coal economy sustained and that the coal economy's decline released, the houses emptying in the particular sequence that economic migration produces, the young families first, then the working-age adults, then the retirees who stayed until they couldn't, the hollow thinning from the head down as the most remote addresses emptied first, and the emptiness crept toward the mouth. By 2021, the hollow held approximately 40 people in maybe 15 occupied houses, most of them near the mouth where the state highway provided access to whatever services the county still offered. The remaining houses, the 35 or so that had been vacated over the previous decades, stood in various states of decay along the road that climbed toward the head of the hollow, some boarded, some collapsed, some simply open, the doors unlocked, and the interiors exposed to the weather and the particular deterioration that mountain climate imposes on structures that no one maintains. The school had been at the mouth of the hollow, a small building, cinder block, built in the 1960s when the hollow's population justified a school and when the county's education budget was funded by the coal severance tax that the active mines produced. The school served the hollow's children from kindergarten through 8th grade, the particular institution that mountain communities build around, the school serving not just the educational function but the social function, the community center, the meeting place, the location where the hollow's identity was maintained through the daily gathering of its youngest members. The school closed in 2008 when the enrollment dropped below the threshold that the state required for maintaining a separate facility. The remaining students, maybe 12, were consolidated into a school in the next town. The bus route that had served the hollow for 40 years canceled, the building locked, the particular institutional death that a school closing represents in a community that was built around it. I heard the bus on my first weekday morning in the hollow, a Tuesday in April of 2021, approximately 7:15 a.m. I was in the kitchen, the room that faced the road, the window providing a view of the hollow's lower section, the road visible for maybe 100 yards, before it curved and climbed into the upper reaches where the empty houses stood. I was making coffee and I heard a diesel engine. The sound was specific, not a truck, not a piece of heavy equipment, not the general diesel noise that any compression ignition engine produces. A school bus. The particular combination of engine note and transmission whine and the occasional squeak of a chassis that school buses produce when they're climbing a grade at low speed, the sound as identifiable as a voice, the acoustic signature of a vehicle type that the ear categorizes immediately and that the brain labels without requiring analysis. School bus, climbing the hollow, moving past my house and continuing up the road. I looked out the window. The road was empty. The sound was there, but the vehicle was not. The diesel note and the transmission whine traveling up the hollow past my window on a road that showed no bus, no vehicle of any kind, the pavement empty and still in the April morning, while the sound of a school bus climbing the grade proceeded up the hollow as if the bus were there and as if the road were carrying it and as if the only thing missing from the picture was the bus itself. The air brakes hissed, the particular sound that pneumatic brakes produce when a school bus stops, the release of pressurized air through the brake system, the hiss followed by the mechanical clunk of the brakes engaging, the sound that every person who has ever waited for a school bus or driven behind one recognizes as the sound of a bus stopping. The sound came from a point on the road approximately 200 yards up the hollow from my house, a location that corresponded to one of the empty houses that I'd noted during my initial exploration of the hollow, a house that was boarded and dark, and that showed the particular vacancy of a structure that had been unoccupied for years. The door opened, the squeal of a school bus door opening on its hinges, the hydraulic mechanism producing the particular sound that bus doors make, the sound carrying down the hollow with the clarity that the valley's acoustics provided, the steep walls channeling the sound toward my position, the way a hallway channels a voice. The door was open, the bus was stopped, at an address where nobody lived, at a stop where no children waited. The door closed. The squeal reversed, the hydraulic closing the door with the same mechanical sound that the opening had produced. The air brakes released. The diesel engine revved. The bus resumed its climb, the sound continuing up the hollow, the engine and the transmission and the chassis, producing the particular audio profile of a school bus in motion on a mountain road. Another stop. Further up the hollow, maybe a quarter mile, the air brakes hissing, the engine idling, the door opening and closing, the particular sequence of sounds that a school bus produces when it stops for a passenger and then resumes its route. The stop corresponded to another empty house, another abandoned address, another driveway that was overgrown and that served a structure that hadn't been occupied in a decade. The bus made 7 stops. I tracked it by sound from my kitchen window, the diesel engine climbing the hollow with the steady pace of a vehicle on a scheduled route, the stops occurring at intervals that corresponded to the addresses along the road, the air brakes and the door operating at each stop with the mechanical precision of a bus performing its function, picking up passengers at the designated stops on a route that the county had canceled 15 years earlier. The sound reached the turnaround at the head of the hollow, and I heard the bus reverse, the transmission whining in the particular gear that school buses use for backing, the engine tone changing as the vehicle executed the turnaround that the road provided and that the bus drivers had been using for 40 years to reverse direction at the end of the route. The bus came back down the hollow, the descent producing a different engine note than the climb, the compression braking and the lower RPM of a diesel descending a grade, the sound tracking down the hollow past my house and toward the mouth and the state highway. The sound faded, the bus reaching the highway, the sound diminishing with distance, the particular acoustic departure of a vehicle moving away from a listener, the diesel note growing fainter until it was absorbed by the ambient sounds of the hollow, the creek and the birds and the April morning continuing without the bus. I mentioned it to my neighbor, Earl, a man in his 70s who had lived in the hollow his entire life, and who was the particular kind of mountain resident who knows everything about the place he lives because the place is small enough and his tenure long enough that the knowledge is comprehensive. I described what I'd heard, the bus, the stops, the route, the sound without the vehicle. I delivered the description with the particular carefulness of a man who has heard something that he's not sure is real, and who needs another person to either confirm or deny the experience. Earl nodded. He said the bus still runs. He said it the way you say something that is established and unremarkable, the flat delivery of a fact that requires no elaboration because the fact is known and the knowing is shared. The bus still runs. He said he'd been hearing it since the school closed in 2008. Every weekday morning at 7:15, the bus climbed the hollow and made its stops and turned around and came back down. The route unchanged, the stops unchanged, the schedule unchanged. He said his wife had heard it since before the school closed. He said the bus route had been running on the same schedule since the 1960s when the school opened and the route was established, and that the sound of the bus on that schedule had become part of the hollow's acoustic identity, the particular sound that weekday mornings produced, the diesel engine at 7:15 as reliable as the creek and the birds, and the other sounds that the hollow generated. He said the bus didn't stop when the route was canceled. The county stopped sending a bus. The school closed. The children were gone. But the sound continued. The route performed by whatever performs it, the stops made at addresses that had been stops for 40 years, the door opening for children who had moved away or grown up, or who had been the children of parents who had moved away, the bus maintaining its schedule in a hollow that no longer needed it and that the county no longer served. I hear it every weekday morning. 7:15, the diesel engine beginning its climb from the mouth of the hollow, the sound tracking up the road past my house, the stops at the empty addresses, the air brakes and the door at each one, the turnaround at the head, the descent back to the highway. The route takes approximately 20 minutes, the same duration it took when the bus was real and the children were waiting and the school was open, and the hollow held 500 people who sent their children to the school at the mouth and who heard the bus every morning at 7:15 the way I hear it now. The hollow holds the bus, the way it holds the empty houses and the overgrown driveways and the particular memory of a community that was here and that is thinning, and that the bus serves regardless of the thinning, the route unchanged, the stops unchanged, the schedule maintained by whatever mechanism the hollow uses to preserve the functions that the living community no longer performs. Every weekday, 7:15. The diesel climbing, the air brakes hissing, the door opening at empty driveways for children who aren't there, and the hollow carries the sound. Down the valley, through the morning, past the houses that are occupied and the houses that aren't. And the bus runs its route. The way it's run it since the 1960s. The way it'll run it after the last 40 people leave and the hollow empties completely, and the road serves nobody, and the bus climbs and stops and opens its door for the particular absence that McDowell County is perfecting, hollow by hollow, year by year. The bus doesn't know the route is canceled. The hollow doesn't know the school is closed. And at 7:15, every weekday, the diesel climbs and the door opens. And the hollow listens to the sound of a service that continues, because the hollow continues, and because the bus is part of the hollow, and because some things don't stop when the reason they started is gone. The bus runs, and the children are gone, and the door opens and closes, and the hollow holds what it holds. I've been on the County Planning Commission for 6 years, which in the currency of rural civic volunteerism means I've attended approximately 200 meetings in community centers and churches and fire halls and the occasional school cafeteria throughout the county. The particular circuit of locations that the Commission uses when it holds its public sessions in the communities that the Commission's decisions affect. The Commission covers the entire county, which in the mountains of Southwest Virginia means covering approximately 400 square miles of terrain that contains maybe 15 distinct communities, each one occupying its own hollow or valley, each one served by its own road and its own informal infrastructure. The particular autonomy that mountain geography imposes on communities that are separated from each other by ridges that make the distance between them longer than the map suggests. The meetings are the county's version of democracy, the particular civic function that planning commissions perform in rural areas, where the decisions about land use and development and the allocation of the county's limited resources directly affect the people who live on the land, who use the roads, and who depend on the infrastructure that the resources fund. The meetings are held in the communities because the communities are too far from the county seat for the residents to travel there, and because the Commission's mandate includes hearing from the people whose lives the Commission's decisions change. I attend every meeting. It's the commitment that the position requires and that I accepted when I agreed to serve, and that I fulfill with the particular diligence of a person who believes that local government matters and that the people who volunteer for it owe the communities they serve the basic courtesy of showing up and listening and recording the concerns that the residents express with enough attention that the concerns are preserved in the minutes and considered in the decisions. February of 2023. A Thursday evening, my schedule showed a meeting in Laurel Fork, a community in the western section of the county that I'd been to once before for a commission session maybe 3 years earlier. The schedule showed the location as the Laurel Fork Community Center, the time as 7 p.m., the agenda listing the standard items that Planning Commission meetings address, the zoning variances and the road maintenance requests, and the particular item that had generated the meeting's request, a proposed development on a piece of land at the head of the hollow that would require a zoning change and that the residents of the community would want to discuss. The schedule had been sent to me by my assistant, Helen, who managed the Commission's calendar with the particular efficiency that rural administrative assistants bring to positions where they are the only administrative staff and where the management of the schedule and the documentation and the communication constitutes the entire administrative function of the organization. Helen received the meeting requests from the county clerk's office, and she entered them on the calendar, and she provided me with the details, and I drove to wherever the calendar said I needed to be. I drove to Laurel Fork on a Thursday evening in February, the route taking me west from the county seat on a state highway, and then onto a county road that climbed into a hollow that I remembered from the previous visit, the terrain narrowing as the road entered the mountains, the ridges pressing close, the forest dark on both sides in the February evening. The drive was approximately 45 minutes, the particular distance that mountain geography converts from the 20 miles the map shows into the 45 minutes that the terrain requires. The community center was where I remembered it, a cinder block building on the left side of the road at a point where the hollow widened enough to accommodate a parking lot and the building and the flat area that the community used for the events that the center hosted. The parking lot held maybe a dozen vehicles, the trucks and the cars that mountain residents drive, the vehicles arranged in the particular informal configuration that rural parking lots produce when there are no painted lines and the drivers park wherever the gravel provides a level surface. The building was lit, the fluorescent light visible through the windows that the cinder block walls contained, the particular blue-white glow of institutional lighting showing through the glass and projecting onto the gravel parking lot, the building operating with the full illumination that a public meeting requires. The door was open, the warm air from the heated interior meeting the cold February air at the threshold with the particular temperature differential that public buildings and mountain communities produce. When the thermostat is set for the comfort of 20 people in a room that is sized for 50, I walked in. The room was set up for the meeting, the standard configuration that community centers adopt when the Planning Commission visits, folding chairs arranged in rows facing a table at the front of the room where the commission members sit, the table holding the particular props of a planning meeting, the maps and the documents and the agenda that the commission provides and that the residents refer to when they raise their concerns. Approximately 20 residents were seated in the chairs, the particular cross-section of a mountain community that planning meetings attract, older men and women mostly, the generation that attends public meetings because they remember when public meetings mattered and because they believe, with the particular faith of people who have lived in the same place for their entire lives, that the concerns they raise will be heard and that the hearing will matter. I sat at the table. I opened my binder. I reviewed the agenda. The meeting began with the standard procedures, the call to order, and the review of old business and the particular administrative ritual that planning commissions perform before the public comment period opens and the residents say what they came to say. The development was the topic. A proposal to rezone a parcel at the head of the hollow from agricultural to commercial, the particular kind of rezoning request that mountain communities respond to with the engaged attention that says this affects us and we have things to say. The residents spoke one at a time, the comments ranging from practical concerns about traffic and road capacity to the more emotional arguments about the character of the community and the particular quality of the hollow that the development would change. I took notes. The minutes are my responsibility. The documentation of who said what and when and what the commission's response was, the official record of the meeting that the county preserves and that the residents can access and that the commission refers to when the decisions are made. My notes were detailed, the particular thoroughness that I bring to the minutes, because the minutes are the proof that the meeting happened and that the concerns were heard and that the process functioned. The meeting lasted approximately 3 hours, the standard duration for a planning meeting with an active community and a contentious topic, the time consumed by the public comments and the commission's responses, and the particular back and forth that mountain communities produce when the development in question threatens the character of the place they live. I closed the meeting at approximately 10 p.m. with the standard adjournment language that the commission uses, and I packed my binder, and I thanked the residents, and I walked to my truck, and I drove the 45 minutes back to my house. The next morning, Helen called. She asked about the meeting. I told her it went well, the standard summary that I provided after every session, the duration and the attendance, and the general character of the public comment. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said the county clerk's office had no record of a meeting scheduled in Laurel Fork. She said she'd received the meeting notice from the clerk's office and entered it on the calendar, and that the notice had included the agenda and the location and the time. She said the clerk's office had no copy of the notice. No meeting had been requested for Laurel Fork. No agenda had been prepared. No session had been scheduled. I said I'd been there. 3 hours, 20 residents, notes and minutes in my binder. Helen told me the Laurel Fork Community Center had been demolished in 2019. The county had torn it down when the maintenance costs exceeded the budget that the community's declining population justified, the building removed and the lot cleared and the property returned to the county's inventory of unimproved parcels. The community center where I'd sat for 3 hours the previous evening had been a gravel lot for 4 years. She told me Laurel Fork had been unincorporated in 2015. The population had dropped below the threshold that the state required for community status, and the county had removed Laurel Fork from its list of recognized communities. The particular administrative death that mountain communities experience, when the people leave and the population drops, and the government decides that the community no longer meets the criteria for the designation. I drove back to Laurel Fork that afternoon. The same route, the same highway, the same county road climbing into the hollow. The road was there. The hollow was there. The terrain was the hollow, I remembered. The community center was not there. At the location where I'd parked the previous evening, where the cinder block building had stood with its fluorescent lights and its folding chairs and its 20 residents, there was a gravel lot. A flat area of compacted gravel bordered by the road on one side and the forest on the other 3 sides. The lot showing the particular condition of a cleared space that has been maintained at the minimum level, the gravel topped occasionally, but the edges encroached by the vegetation that mountain terrain produces when human maintenance falls below the threshold that keeps the forest back. No building, no foundation visible, no cinder blocks, no walls, no windows, no door. The lot was an empty rectangle of gravel that showed no evidence that a building had stood on it within the last 4 years. The surface uniform and undisturbed, the particular blankness of a space that has been cleared and that holds nothing. I stood on the gravel. I stood on the ground where I had walked through a door and sat at a table and listened to 20 people talk about a development that threatened their community for 3 hours the previous evening. The gravel was under my feet where the floor had been. The sky was above me where the ceiling had been. The forest was on 3 sides where the walls had been. I opened my binder. The notes were there. My handwriting, my pen, my notation system, the particular format that I use for planning commission minutes, the date and the location, and the time and the names of the residents who spoke, and the content of their comments and the commission's responses. 3 hours of documentation in my handwriting on pages that recorded a meeting that took place in a building that didn't exist in a community that had been unincorporated 8 years before I sat in it. The names. I checked the names of the residents who had spoken at the meeting, the names I'd written in my notes when each person introduced themselves before their comment, the standard identification that the minutes require. The names were mountain names, the surnames that the communities in this section of the county have been using for generations. I searched the county records for the names. Some appeared, residents of the county living in other communities. Some didn't appear at all, the names belonging to no one in any current database, the people who had sat in folding chairs and raised concerns about a development existing only in my notes and in the meeting that my notes documented and that nobody had scheduled. The minutes are typed. I typed them the day I drove back to Laurel Fork and stood on the gravel lot. The notes transcribed into the formal format that the commission's records require. The minutes filed in the binder with the other sessions. The Laurel Fork meeting documented with the same thoroughness as every other meeting I've attended in 6 years. The county clerk doesn't know what to do with them. The minutes document a meeting that the commission didn't schedule in a community that doesn't exist in a building that was demolished 4 years before the meeting was held. The clerk has filed them in a separate folder, the particular administrative solution for documents that don't fit into the existing filing system, the minutes preserved because destroying official records is not something the clerk's office does, and because the records, irregular as they are records nonetheless. I check the calendar now. Every meeting that Helen enters, I verify with the clerk's office. Every community center that the schedule directs me to, I confirm, is standing. The verification is a new step in my process. The particular additional procedure that my experience at Laurel Fork imposed on a process that previously assumed the meetings were real and the buildings were standing and the communities existed. They do. Every meeting since Laurel Fork has been real and confirmed, and the buildings have been standing and the communities have been recognized. The system works. The meetings happen. The minutes are filed. But on a Thursday evening in February of 2023, I drove to a hollow and sat in a building that had been torn down and listened to residents of a community that had been unincorporated, and I wrote the minutes of a meeting that nobody scheduled, and the notes are in my binder, and the minutes are in the clerk's folder. And the concerns that 20 people raised about a development that would change their hollow are documented in my handwriting. 20 people who cared enough about their community to attend a meeting and to speak and to ask the commission to protect what they had. In a community that doesn't exist anymore. In a building that doesn't stand anymore. On a night when the lights were on and the chairs were set and the democracy functioned the way it's supposed to function, the people heard, the concerns recorded, the process honored. By a community that the county says is gone, and a building that the county says is demolished, and 20 people that the records say were not there. My notes say they were, and the notes are real, and the meeting was real, and the hollow holds what it holds, including, apparently, a community that refuses to be unincorporated. I listen to AM radio because the mountains demand it, the particular geology and geography of eastern Tennessee creating the radio environment that anyone who drives the hollows after dark learns to accommodate, the FM signals blocked by the ridges and the valleys, the line-of-sight transmission that FM requires, interrupted by every ridge that the road crosses and every hollow that the road descends into, the signal dropping to static every time the terrain puts a mountain between the antenna and the tower. AM doesn't have this problem. The longer wavelengths of AM radio bounce off the ionosphere and follow the terrain and penetrate the valleys that FM can't reach. The particular physics of amplitude modulation providing reception in locations where frequency modulation fails, the AM band delivering signal to the hollows and the drainages, and the creek bottoms where the mountain roads run and where the drivers who use them need something to listen to. I've been driving the mountain roads of eastern Tennessee for 22 years. The particular career of a man who delivers propane to the rural communities that the gas pipelines don't reach, and that the propane trucks serve with the particular essential service that heating fuel provides in a region where the winters are cold enough that heat is not a comfort but a survival requirement. The routes take me through hollows and over ridges, on roads that range from state highways to county roads to the unnamed tracks that access the most remote addresses. The particular network of pavement and gravel and dirt that mountain delivery requires, and that the truck and I navigate 5 days a week in every season and every weather. Cocke County is part of my territory, the county that sits east of Knoxville in the foothills of the Great Smokies, the terrain steep enough and the hollows deep enough that the particular isolation of mountain living is available within an hour of a metropolitan area. The roads through Cocke County are the roads that the terrain dictates, following the creeks and the rivers through valleys that the mountains define, the particular winding, climbing, descending routes that mountain roads produce when the engineering follows the geology rather than attempting to override it. August of 2022, a Wednesday night, approximately midnight. I was running a late delivery, a customer who'd called in an emergency order when their tank ran dry unexpectedly and who needed fuel before the morning, and who lived in a hollow about 15 miles from my yard in Newport. The delivery was routine in every respect except the hour. The late-night run that propane delivery occasionally requires when the customer's situation is urgent enough that the company authorizes the overtime and the driver agrees to the hours. I was driving through a hollow on a county road, the truck loaded with the delivery, the road following a creek through terrain that was steep and dark and showing the particular August density of the southern Appalachian forest, the canopy full, the understory thick, the road a tunnel through vegetation that blocked the sky and that produced the particular acoustic isolation of a hollow at midnight when the road is empty and the forest is the only thing on both sides. The radio was on. AM, the band that the hollows required, the dial tuned to a station out of Knoxville that I listened to for the late-night programming, the talk shows and the music that the AM band carries after the daytime programming ends and the nighttime format takes over. The signal was good for the first few miles. The Knoxville tower strong enough to reach into the hollow with the particular power that 50,000-watt AM stations produce, the signal following the terrain with enough strength to maintain the audio through the curves and the grades that the hollow imposed. The signal changed at approximately the 10-mile mark. Not a fade, not the gradual diminishing that distance and terrain produce when a signal is weakening. A change. The Knoxville station replaced by another signal that arrived with a strength and a clarity that was not the character of a distant station being received in favorable conditions, but the character of a local station being received at close range, the audio full and clear and present in the way that radio signals are present when the transmitter is nearby. The station was unfamiliar. The format was local. The particular programming that small market AM stations produce when they serve a single community, the mix of local news and weather and advertisements, and the announcer's voice providing the connective tissue between the segments with the particular style of local radio, the conversational tone, the references to community events, the particular intimacy of a broadcast that is produced for and by the people who live in a specific place. The announcer identified the community, a name that I didn't recognize, a town name that the announcer used with the casual frequency that local broadcasters use when they reference their community, the name appearing in the weather forecast and in the advertisements and in the news segments, with the particular centrality of a place that is the center of the broadcast world. The advertisements were specific: a hardware store, the announcer reading the ad with the particular delivery that local radio ads produce, the scripted enthusiasm and the detailed inventory, and the closing with the address and the phone number. A diner, the daily specials listed, the hours noted, the location described relative to the town's main street. A feed store, the seasonal offerings detailed, the prices mentioned, the particular inventory of a business that serves a farming community. A church, the announcement of a revival the following weekend, the preacher's name and the times of the services and the particular invitation that church announcements on mountain radio provide, the come one come all warmth of a congregation that wants the community to participate. The programming was professional. The audio quality was clean, the announcer's voice polished with the particular skill that experience produces, the delivery smooth and confident, and carrying the authority of someone who has been behind a microphone for years and who knows how to use a voice to communicate with a community. The advertisements were produced, not the amateur read of a small station owner reading copy from a typed page, but the scripted, rehearsed delivery of commercial content that has been written and practiced and performed with the particular attention that advertisers pay when the advertising represents their business to their community. I listened for approximately 40 minutes. The station remained strong through the hollow, the signal maintaining its clarity and its presence as I drove the delivery route, the programming continuing with the particular constancy of a station that is on the air and that is broadcasting with the steady output of a transmitter that is functioning within its normal parameters. The news was local, the weather was local, the advertisements were local, every element of the programming oriented toward the community that the station served and that the announcer named and that I had never heard of in 22 years of driving the roads of eastern Tennessee. I completed the delivery and drove home, and the station faded as I left the hollow, the signal diminishing with distance the way local signals diminish when you drive away from the transmitter, the audio thinning and the static increasing until the Knoxville station returned with its stronger signal and the local station was gone. I searched for the station when I got home. The call letters that the announcer had used, the four-letter designation that every licensed station broadcasts as part of its identification, did not match any station licensed by the FCC in Tennessee. I searched the adjacent states. No match. The call letters were not assigned to any licensed broadcaster in the region or, as far as I could determine from the FCC's database, in any state. I searched for the town. The name that the announcer had used, the community that the programming had been centered on, did not appear on any current map of Cocke County or of eastern Tennessee. The name was not a community that existed in the current geography of the region. I searched historical maps. The name appeared on maps from the 1950s and the early 1960s, a small community in a valley in Cocke County that had been a settlement since the 1800s and that had grown into a town of approximately 400 people by the mid-20th century. A community with the particular infrastructure that small mountain towns develop when the population is stable and the economy is functional, a main street and a church and the businesses that the announcer's advertisements had described, the hardware store and the diner and the feed store that served the community. The town was inundated in 1968. The Tennessee Valley Authority, as part of its program of dam construction and reservoir creation that transformed the river valleys of eastern Tennessee in the mid-20th century, built a dam downstream of the town, and the reservoir that the dam created flooded the valley where the town sat, the water rising over a period of months until the town was submerged, the buildings and the streets and the infrastructure disappearing beneath a body of water that covered the valley to a depth of approximately 60 feet. The 400 residents were relocated. The businesses were closed. The church was abandoned. The town was erased by the water that the TVA deemed necessary for flood control and power generation, and that the valley and its community paid for with their existence. The town has been under 60 feet of water since 1968. The hardware store, the diner, the feed store, the church that was holding a revival the following weekend, all of it submerged for 54 years beneath a reservoir that the TVA maintains and that the recreation industry uses for fishing and boating, and the particular leisure that reservoirs provide to the regions that sacrifice the valleys to create them. and a radio station that serves the town was broadcasting from beneath the water, or from wherever the town exists now that the water has covered it. The signal strong and clear and professional, the programming current and local, and oriented toward a community that the maps say is submerged and that the radio says is thriving, the hardware store open, the diner serving specials, the feed store stocked, the church preparing for a revival. I've driven through that hollow many times since. The AM band picks up the Knoxville stations and the static and the occasional distant signal that nighttime propagation delivers from stations hundreds of miles away. The local station has not returned. The signal that was strong and clear and present for 40 minutes on an August night has not been received again. But I listen. Every time I drive through that hollow at night, I scan the AM band, moving the dial through the frequencies, listening for the particular audio signature of a local station broadcasting from a town that has been underwater for 54 years. I listen for the announcer's voice and the advertisements and the local news of a community that the water took and that the radio, on one night in August, gave back. The reservoir covers the valley. The water is dark and deep, and the town is beneath it, and the buildings are there. The structures slowly dissolving in the fresh water that the TVA maintains at the specified level, the hardware store and the diner and the feed store disintegrating by degrees at the bottom of a lake that erased them from the surface of the world. But the signal was there, for 40 minutes, clear and strong and local, broadcasting from a town that the water says is gone and that the radio says is not. And the church is holding a revival. Next weekend. The preacher's name and the times of the services announced on a station that broadcasts from 60 feet underwater in a valley that the TVA flooded in 1968. And the signal was real. And the programming was real. And the town, in whatever form it exists beneath the water or beyond the water, or in the particular frequency that the AM band accessed on an August night in a hollow in Cock County, is real enough to broadcast and real enough to advertise and real enough to hold a revival at a church that has been at the bottom of a lake for 54 years. The dial turns, the static hisses, the Knoxville stations come in strong, and somewhere in the frequencies, a town that drowned in 1968 is still on the air, broadcasting to whoever can hear it, from beneath the water, in the dark, on the AM band that the hollows require. And the revival is next weekend. And the hardware store is open, and the diner is serving specials, and the town is alive, on the radio, in the frequencies, under 60 feet of water, and the signal is out there, waiting for the dial to find it again. I live on top of a coal mine, not metaphorically, not in the general sense that everyone in Raleigh County, West Virginia, lives on top of coal mines because the county has been mined since the 1880s, and the tunnels run beneath the surface in networks that the companies mapped when the mines were operating, and that the decades since have been slowly compressing and flooding and converting from passable tunnels into the particular geological memory of extraction that the mountain holds in its interior. I live on top of a specific coal mine, the Whitewood No. 4, the entrance to which is approximately a quarter mile from my house, visible from my back porch as a concrete plug set into the hillside where the portal once stood, the sealed mouth of a mine that operated from 1957 to 2004, and that employed at its peak maybe 200 men who entered the mountain every day through the opening that the concrete now fills, and who worked the seam that the mountain held, and who came out at the end of their shifts with the coal dust and the fatigue, and the particular knowledge of the mountain's interior that only miners possess. The mine closed in 2004. The seam was exhausted, the particular term that the industry uses when the coal that justified the mine's existence has been extracted to the point where the remaining deposits are too thin or too deep or too fractured to mine economically, the mountain having given what it was going to give, and the company having taken what it was going to take. The closing followed the standard sequence that mine closures require under federal and state regulations. The equipment removed, the tunnels abandoned, the entrance sealed with the concrete plug that the law mandates, the plug designed to prevent unauthorized entry and to contain the gases that abandoned mines produce, and to serve as the visible marker that says this mine is closed, and the mountain behind the plug is no longer the domain of men and machines. The house I live in was built in 1962 by a miner who worked at Whitewood No. 4, one of the dozens of houses that the mining communities produced in the hollows near the mines The houses climbing the hillsides above the portals, the miners living on top of the mountains they worked inside, the particular geography of coalfield life, where the home and the workplace were connected by the vertical dimension rather than the horizontal, the miner descending from his house on the hillside to the portal in the valley, and then descending again from the portal into the earth, the daily journey from surface to surface with the mountain between. I bought the house in 2013, 9 years after the mine closed. The house was cheap because houses in Raleigh County are cheap because the industry that supported the housing market is gone, and the population that the industry sustained is leaving, and the economic forces that determine property values have determined that a 3-bedroom house on a hillside above a sealed mine in a county with declining population is worth approximately what the land beneath it would bring if the house weren't on it. The mine entrance is visible from the back porch, a concrete plug, maybe 10 feet in diameter, set into the hillside at the point where the portal had been cut, the concrete poured flush with the rock face, the surface showing the particular gray smoothness of structural concrete that has been exposed to 20 years of mountain weather, the plug intact, the seal unbroken, the state inspection sticker visible on the metal plate that the regulations require be mounted on the seal, the sticker showing the date of the most recent annual inspection, the state certifying that the seal holds and that the mine behind it is contained. The sounds started in my second year, October of 2014, the first time I heard them, the particular vibration arriving through the floor of the house at approximately 2 in the morning on a Wednesday night, the sound not audible in the conventional sense of sound traveling through air but rather felt, the vibration carried through the rock and the soil and the foundation of the house and the floor joists and the floorboards, and into my feet if I was standing or into my body if I was lying in bed. The particular transmission of underground sound that mountain residents in mining areas learn to recognize because the sound of mining, when it occurs beneath you, is as much a physical sensation as an auditory one. The vibration was rhythmic, the particular pattern of a cutting machine working a coal face, the continuous miner that is the primary extraction tool in underground coal mining, the machine producing a rhythmic vibration as the cutting head rotates and contacts the coal face and removes the material in the particular pattern that the machine's design dictates. The vibration came and went in cycles, the cutting and the pause and the repositioning and the cutting again, the particular operational rhythm that a continuous miner produces when it's working a face, the machine operated by a miner who knows the seam and who works the machine with the efficiency that experience produces. I dismissed it. The logical explanation was available, and I selected it with the particular willingness of a person who has just bought a house and who doesn't want the house to present problems that the purchase price didn't account for. Old mines produce sounds. The tunnels shift and settle as the rock adjusts to the absence of the coal that the extraction removed. The particular geological process that mining communities know as subsidence, the ground above the tunnels compressing as the support that the coal provided is no longer there. The settlement producing sounds that carry through the rock with the particular clarity that solid media provides for vibration transmission. But subsidence doesn't sound like a continuous miner. Subsidence produces groans and cracks and the occasional sharp report of rock failing under stress, the particular vocabulary of geological adjustment that the earth generates when it's rearranging itself around the voids that mining created. What I was hearing was not geological adjustment. What I was hearing was machinery, the rhythmic, repetitive, operational sound of equipment that was designed for a specific purpose, and that was performing that purpose with the particular signature that mining equipment produces when it's working. My neighbor confirmed it. Earl, a man of 73, who had worked at Whitewood No. 4 for 30 years, from 1974 until the mine closed in 2004, a man who had spent approximately 60,000 hours underground in the tunnels that ran beneath our houses, and who knew the sound of every piece of equipment that the mine had operated with, the particular intimacy of a man whose life had been defined by the sound and the vibration of underground machinery. I mentioned the vibration to Earl without describing it, without characterizing it, simply noting that I'd felt something through the floor and asking if he'd experienced the same. He had. He described it before I described it to him. The particular rhythm of the continuous miner, the operational cycle of cutting and pausing and repositioning, the vibration pattern that he'd felt through his floor at approximately the same time on approximately the same night. He said it was the joy continuous miner, the specific model that Whitewood Number 4 had been using when the mine closed, the machine producing a vibration signature that was as identifiable to Earl as a person's voice, the particular frequency and rhythm and intensity that 30 years of working alongside the machine had burned into his recognition system. He said the conveyor was running too. The belt system that transported the cut coal from the face to the surface, the continuous loop of rubber and steel that ran through the tunnels for miles, and that produced its own vibration signature, the particular low-frequency hum that a loaded conveyor belt generates when it's moving material, the sound different from the cutting machine's rhythmic cycle, the belt producing a constant, sustained vibration that overlaid the miner's cutting pattern, the way a drone underlies a melody. Earl sat on his porch, and he identified the equipment the way a conductor identifies the instruments in an orchestra, the continuous miner, and the conveyor and the ventilation fans and the shuttle cars, each piece of machinery producing its particular vibration through the ground and into the houses that sat above the tunnels, the mine operating beneath us, with the full complement of equipment that had been present when the mine was active and that had been removed when the mine closed 20 years earlier. I went to the portal the next morning. The sealed entrance, the concrete plug set into the hillside, the inspection sticker showing the state's most recent certification. The plug was intact. The concrete showed no cracks, no displacement, no evidence of any force operating against it from the inside. The seal holding the mountain's interior behind a barrier that the state certified annually and that 20 years of inspection had confirmed as sound. I pressed my hand against the concrete. I expected to feel something, the vibration of machinery operating behind the seal, the particular transmission of underground sound through the rock and the concrete and into the hand that I pressed against the surface. The concrete was still, cold, holding nothing that my hand could detect, the plug blocking whatever was behind it with the particular finality that structural concrete provides. But at night, on certain nights, at 2 and 3 and 4 in the morning, the mine operates. The vibrations come through the ground and through the foundations and through the floors of the houses that sit above the tunnels. The sounds of machinery that was removed in 2004, performing operations in tunnels that were sealed in 2004, on a seam that was exhausted in 2004. Earl and I have talked about it many times. He sits on his porch and he listens through the ground beneath his feet, and he identifies the equipment by its vibration, the way he identified it for 30 years, when the identification was professional rather than haunted. He says the mine sounds the same machines, the same operational patterns, the same particular rhythm of extraction that the Whitewood Number 4 produced when it was working the seam that the company said was exhausted and that the concrete says is sealed. He says the mine doesn't know it's closed. He says it the way old miners say things about mines, with the particular anthropomorphism that men who spend their lives inside mountains develop when the mountain is their workplace, and when the workplace becomes, through decades of daily contact, something closer to a relationship than a job. The mine doesn't know it's closed. The mine is working the seam. The equipment is running. The coal is being cut and the belts are moving, and the ventilation is circulating air through tunnels that the concrete has sealed from the outside world. The state inspector comes every year. He checks the seal. He certifies the plug. He documents the condition of the concrete and the condition of the metal plate and the condition of the inspection sticker, and he files his report. And the report says the mine is closed and the seal is intact, and the Whitewood Number 4 is performing its post-closure function of being closed. And the inspector is right. The mine is closed. The seal is intact. The concrete holds. During the day, when the inspector comes, when the light is on the hillside and the portal shows its concrete face and the mountain holds its silence and the houses above the tunnels feel nothing through their floors. At night the mine opens. Not the portal, not the concrete, not the physical entrance that the regulations sealed and that the state certifies. The mine opens in whatever way mines open when the surface is sealed and the equipment is gone and the seam is exhausted, and the men who worked it are retired or dead, the particular operation that continues in the interior of a mountain that was mined for 47 years, and that the mining converted from passive rock into something that knows what extraction feels like, and that performs the extraction on its own schedule, with its own equipment in its own hours. The concrete holds. The seal is intact. The inspector certifies. And the vibrations come through the ground at 2 in the morning. And Earl sits on his porch and identifies the equipment. and the mine works the seam that was exhausted 20 years ago. And the mountain holds what it holds. Behind the concrete, in the tunnels, in the dark. The mine that was closed in 2004, and that doesn't know it's closed, and that operates on certain nights with the particular rhythm of extraction that 200 men performed for 47 years, and that the mountain learned, and that the mountain continues. Because mines don't close, not really, not inside the mountain. The portal closes, the seal goes in, the inspection certifies. But the mountain remembers what it was asked to do, and on certain nights it does it, and the sound comes through the ground, and the houses feel it, and the retired miners identify the equipment they use to operate, and the seam that was exhausted keeps giving to whatever is mining it now. I deliver packages to a town called Waynesville every Tuesday, which is the particular day that my route takes me through the section of western North Carolina, where Waynesville sits in the valley of the Pigeon River between the Balsam Mountains and the Great Smokies, a town of approximately 10,000 people that serves as the county seat of Haywood County, and that provides the commercial and governmental services that the surrounding mountain communities depend on. The town is real. The town is established. The town has been where it is since the early 1800s, when the first settlers chose the valley because the river provided water, and the valley provided flat ground, and the mountains provided the particular beauty and the particular isolation that settlers in the southern Appalachians were looking for. I've been delivering to Waynesville every Tuesday for 4 years, the route taking me from the distribution center in Asheville west, on I-40 through the Pigeon River Gorge, and then south on the highway that descends into the valley, where Waynesville occupies the flat ground along the river. The exit is exit 100, the particular off-ramp that every delivery driver and every tourist and every resident uses to access the town from the interstate. The ramp descending from the highway elevation to the valley floor, where the gas station and the McDonald's and the Walmart and the particular commercial infrastructure of a small American town provides the transition from the interstate world to the local world. I know this exit. I know the gas station. I know the McDonald's. I know the main street that the exit ramp feeds into, the particular sequence of businesses and buildings and intersections that the route to my delivery stops follows. I know Waynesville the way any delivery driver knows the towns on their route, not as a resident but as a regular visitor. The particular familiarity that weekly repetition produces over 4 years, the town committed to a mental map that shows the delivery stops and the routes between them and the particular features that navigation requires. November of 2023, a Tuesday. The weather was clear, the November sky showing the particular blue that western North Carolina produces after a cold front passes and the air is dry and the visibility extends for miles, the mountains showing their November colors, the oaks still holding brown leaves, the sky vivid above the bare canopy. I was running my normal route, the truck loaded with the day's deliveries, the manifest showing the Waynesville stops in the sequence that the route optimization software had arranged them, the particular order that the deliveries would follow as I worked through the town. I took exit 100. The ramp curved to the right and descended toward the valley floor, the standard configuration of the exit that I'd been taking every Tuesday for 4 years. The truck decelerating from highway speed to the ramp speed, the brakes engaged, the truck descending the grade toward the intersection at the bottom of the ramp, where the ramp met the road that led into town. The road at the bottom of the ramp led into forest. I processed this with the delayed recognition of a mind that is expecting one thing and receiving another, and that requires time to reconcile the discrepancy. The road was there, the pavement continuing beyond the ramp's intersection in the direction that Waynesville should have been, but the road ran through forest. Not the commercial zone that should have been there, not the gas station and the McDonald's and the Walmart and the businesses and the parking lots and the traffic lights that the exit ramp delivered you into every time you took it. Forest, trees, large trees, the trunks thick and the canopy high, the particular appearance of hardwood forest that has been growing undisturbed for a long time, the trees showing the diameter and the height that decades or centuries of uninterrupted growth produce. I stopped the truck at the intersection, the engine idling, the truck sitting at the bottom of the exit ramp, the road ahead showing pavement running through forest, the pavement appearing to be the same road surface that had always been there, but the surroundings changed entirely. The commercial and residential and municipal infrastructure of a town of 10,000 people replaced by forest that showed no evidence that any of that infrastructure had ever existed. The gas station was not there. The concrete pad where the pumps stood, the canopy that covered them, the building that housed the convenience store, none of it was present. The ground where the gas station should have been showed trees, mature trees, growing in positions that corresponded to the footprint of the station, and that would have required the station to not exist for the trees to have grown there. The particular evidence of long-term absence rather than recent removal. The trees saying this station was never here, rather than this station was recently demolished. The McDonald's was not there. The main street was not there. The courthouse was not there. The shops and the restaurants and the banks and the churches and the schools and the houses and the 3,000 people who lived in them were not there. The valley held forest and the river and the terrain and the particular beauty of a mountain valley that has never been developed. The landscape showing the undisturbed character of a place that humans have not yet altered. I drove forward, slowly, the truck moving at maybe 10 miles per hour, the headlights unnecessary in the November daylight, but the situation demanding the particular caution that the incomprehensible produces, the body's response to an environment that the mind cannot categorize, the speed reduced to the pace that allows processing, and that allows retreat if retreat becomes necessary. The road ran through the forest for maybe a quarter mile, the pavement showing the same surface that I'd been driving on every Tuesday for 4 years, the lane markings and the asphalt identical to the road I knew, the road existing as it had always existed but running through a landscape that was not the landscape that the road served. The river was visible through the trees. The Pigeon River, running through the valley in the particular channel that I knew, the water visible in the gaps between the trunks, the river occupying the same position that it occupied when Waynesville surrounded it. The river was there. The valley was there. The mountains on both sides were there, the Balsams to the south and the Smokies to the north. The particular geography of the valley unchanged. The town was not there. The 3,000 people and the buildings they occupied and the streets they used and the infrastructure they depended on had been subtracted from the valley, the particular deletion of a human settlement leaving the landscape in the state it had occupied before the settlement was built. The valley, showing what it had held before the 1800s when the settlers arrived, and what it would hold after whatever period of time it takes for a town to disappear and for the forest to reclaim the ground. I turned around. The truck executing a 3-point turn on the road in the forest, the maneuver requiring the particular attention that turning a delivery truck on a 2-lane road demands, the mirrors showing forest behind me, and the windshield showing forest ahead of me, and the valley holding its trees and its river and its mountains and its absolute absence of Waynesville. I drove back to the exit ramp. The ramp was there, climbing from the valley floor to the interstate, the particular infrastructure of the highway system functioning normally, the ramp providing the connection between the valley and the highway that it had always provided. I drove up the ramp and merged onto 140 and continued west to the next exit, exit 98, which served a smaller community on the other side of the ridge. The community at exit 98 was there. The gas station was there. The houses were there. The people were there, going about a Tuesday in November with the particular normalcy of a community that was functioning the way communities function. I pulled into the gas station parking lot and I sat in the truck and I looked at the town around me, and the town was real and present and normal. I drove back to exit 100. Approximately 15 minutes had passed since I'd turned around in the forest where Waynesville should have been. I took the exit. The ramp descended toward the valley floor. The intersection at the bottom of the ramp appeared. The gas station was there. The McDonald's was there. The main street was there. Waynesville was there. The town present and functioning. The buildings and the streets and the people occupying the valley with the particular density of a town of 10,000. The commercial zone at the exit, showing the gas station and the restaurants and the parking lots that every Tuesday showed. The town performing its existence as a town the way it had been performing it for 200 years. I sat at the intersection and I looked at the town, and the town was there, and the forest was not there, and the valley held what it had always held, which was a town, a county seat, 10,000 people, the particular accumulation of 2 centuries of human settlement visible in every direction. I made my deliveries, the manifest, the stops, the packages, the signatures, the route working through Waynesville, the way it worked through Waynesville every Tuesday, the town providing the addresses and the recipients, and the particular infrastructure of a functioning community that receives deliveries because it is a community, and because communities received deliveries, and because Tuesday was a Tuesday, and the town was a town. Nobody noticed. I mentioned it to one of my regular recipients, a woman at a law office on Main Street who received packages every week and who I'd developed the particular friendly familiarity that delivery drivers develop with regular recipients. I said I'd had trouble finding the town, the particular understatement that covered the experience, without requiring the explanation that the full truth demanded. She laughed and said Waynesville's hard to miss, and the conversation moved on. It is hard to miss. A town of 10,000 people in a valley is hard to miss. A gas station at an exit ramp is hard to miss. A McDonald's beside a gas station is hard to miss. And yet, for approximately 1 hour on a Tuesday in November, the town was not there. The valley held forest. The river ran through trees. The exit ramp delivered me to a landscape that predated the town by centuries. The particular view of the valley as it existed before humans chose it and built in it and populated it. The town was gone and the forest was there. And then the town was back and the forest was gone. The transition occurring in both directions without any visible mechanism, the town disappearing without destruction and reappearing without construction, the switch between town and forest happening as a change in state rather than a process, the valley holding one thing and then holding the other with the particular simplicity of a light that is off and then on. I've taken exit 100 every Tuesday since. The town is there, every time. The gas station and the McDonald's and the Main Street, and the 3,000 deliverable addresses that my manifest produces. But I check. I take the exit and I look at the bottom of the ramp, and I confirm that the gas station is there before I proceed. The particular verification of a man who drove off an exit ramp into a forest where a town should have been, and who needs to confirm every Tuesday that the town is still participating in its own existence. It is. The town is there. So far. And I think about the forest, the trees that were large and old, the canopy that was dense and high, the particular age of a forest that had been growing for decades or centuries in a valley that currently holds a town, the forest that exists beneath the town, or beside the town, or in the moments when the town decides not to be there, the landscape reverting to the state that the valley held before the settlement and that the valley will hold after the settlement. The town is temporary, the forest is permanent. And for 1 hour on a Tuesday in November, the valley showed me the difference. The way mountains do, the way valleys do, the way the land shows you, if you arrive at the right moment on the right Tuesday, what it looked like before you got there, and what it will look like after you're gone.